Welcome to Feminist Utopia, a community dedicated to envisioning and creating a more just society for all.
Welcome to Feminist Utopia. I am so sure you've heard all about Trump's tweets regarding the Squad, who we all know are a collective of freshman congressmen who are all women of color. The news story has been primarily about Trump telling them to go back and fix their own places. This has overshadowed another story about the public conflict between the Squad and Nancy Pelosi.
Today, we're going to talk about a feminist utopia where there is less political mudslinging and more meaningful discussion regarding policy. Let's take a step back, though, and define the Squad again, consisting of 4 women of color, Representatives Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts, and Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. I did a little bit of research because I was interested in who started calling them the Squad and when did that happen. Turns out the 4 women were at a photo shoot and they kind of gave themselves the name. According to Ayanna Pressley, she said someone suggested they should do a hashtag or something, Squad Goals. And then it kind of developed into this whole other thing. And she also suggested that anyone who's interested in building a more equitable and just world can be a part of the Squad.
So yay, I'm part of the Squad. Hooray.
Me too! You and I and the 80-something old white guy from...
The representative who had a very savvy social media manager who asked on Twitter if he could join. I also highly approve of taking back the hashtag Squad Goals from Taylor Swift, who would often use that before. So it's being used for a much more admirable goal than, I'm not going to say it, mediocre white music. Sorry, said it. Sorry, not sorry.
Oh, and I'm like, Taylor Swift? Yeah, not a fan. But I think the Squad moniker has become a thing because these women are so passionate and they advocate popular causes and have massive social media followings.
AOC has over 2 million more Twitter followers than Nancy Pelosi. I didn't even know Nancy Pelosi had a Twitter account. I guess that I shouldn't be surprised by that.
Oh, I follow it. I'm not on Twitter that much, but I do follow Nancy Pelosi. I admire her. But we're going to get more into that later. But, you know, some of the policies that the Squad has championed are really popular with the public. Medicare for all, student debt cancellation, tuition-free college, and that whole Green New Deal, which I find intriguing. I don't know all about it, but we have to do something soon.
But everybody on the Democratic primary debate stage had a position on the Green New Deal. I learned that when I was doing the research back for the episode about the candidates.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this was taking over the conversation, which shows how, and in fairness to everybody else, it isn't just the Squad talking about a Green New Deal.
Right. And it's not just the Squad talking about these other things either.
Yes.
But I feel like maybe the language that they're using and the reach that they have is what sets them apart.
Yes. And so it's the style of conversation, perhaps even more than the substance, that is probably at the core of the issue with the Squad versus the established Democratic leadership.
The main thing that separates the Squad from the rest of the Democrats is they represent 4 of the safest districts in America. They have secure knowledge that their seats, they come from deep blue backyards and they're safe enough in their reelection that they don't have to worry about being on the extreme edge.
I disagree with that, in that it will always be a Democratic seat, but they're not always necessarily guaranteed that they're going to be the Democrat sitting in their seat. If they aren't pushing for these further left positions, are they going to be able to hold on to those seats? And I think AOC is a perfect example of that. She defeated longtime Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley in the primary. Democrats can get primaried too. In that sense, will it always be a Democrat? Yes. Could a moderate Democrat from Louisiana cut it in Queens? Probably not. When we talk about safe seats, I think we have to be aware that, especially for AOC, she comes from a fairly radical district. Her seat isn't necessarily secure if she isn't out there asking for these things. I see this in the Seattle council members race, that if the people aren't pushing these far left policies, they're not even being seriously considered to run for city government. And so in these far left places, I'm seeing how that plays out. Whereas that's not an issue in Texas.
No.
If you put a D next to your name, you're called a communist. So
one of the reasons why Trump weighs in on the squad, in my opinion, is that he is trying to frame all Democrats as extremely liberal and associate all Democrats with the squad, so that in the presidential year, they'll think that they have the choice between radical leftist socialist Democrat or himself as the reasonable candidate.
But the problem with that is, as a candidate, you can't control how the other group portrays you. Nancy Pelosi, up until this whole thing with the squad, was the crazy left-wing liberal from California, and I don't know how much more establishment you can get than Nancy Pelosi. She wasn't asking for the sun and the moon and the stars. But a woman in power is going to be radical to a lot of people, especially Trump's base. The fact that there's a woman up there alone is a problem. Again, I don't know how telling the squad to be quieter is really going to change that narrative. If you have Ilhan Omar up there wearing her headscarf, that's radical. Just existing is radical.
That's true.
I agree that in Ilhan Omar's district, extremely left-wing in Minnesota, all of the squad have extremely liberal districts that they're coming from.
And I think the biggest problem within the Democratic Party is that divide between the Democrats that were elected to effect this massive change that the progressives believe is necessary.
Yeah.
And then the Democrats that got elected from swing districts and were elected as more moderate with the promise of compromising with the Republicans in office to get things done.
And here's the surprising statistic about that is AOC has voted with Trump's suggested policies about 18% of the time. You would think from how she is portrayed on Fox News, that number would be 0.
That's true. And actually, I wasn't aware of that.
It's just one of those things that I picked up while we were doing research. And AOC's not going to push that narrative either, because if she goes back to her district and says she's compromising with Trump, how's that going to play?
Yeah, that's not going to win her friends.
Exactly.
But I think when we talk about the conflict between Nancy Pelosi and the squad, and by Nancy Pelosi, I guess I'm meaning the established Democratic senators that have been in office for a while, is they have to look at a bigger picture, that we need to have a majority in the House, in the Senate, in order to get things done. And Democrats would not have the majority unless they had those newcomers who flipped those Republican-held battleground seats.
And I don't think that AOC takes away from that, in my opinion. And I understand that the Democrats have been focused on trying to create party discipline akin to the Republican Party. But I almost think that you'd be better off trying to build cold fusion or create unicorns in a lab in terms of ability to affect that. The problem with the Democratic Party is it's a huge tent. So you need these far-left people, and you need these almost Republican-type people, like the governor of Louisiana who signed in that heartbeat bill, who's a Democrat, who broke with his own caucus because he's trying to think of a bigger picture, and that is to remain as governor of Louisiana. And the good in having somebody who isn't a former Klan member, I guess, as the governor of the state. Party discipline, that's Nancy Pelosi's job. She's the one who's bearing the brunt of that.
Right.
That's not an easy place to be.
Right. We have the perpetual conflict between younger members who want to change fast and older members who say that you have to deal with political reality. I believe that, especially with this Trump administration, the political reality is changing. It's a conflict now of actual world views.
Yes.
No matter how moderate or left, Democrats of a certain age were raised in an atmosphere of liberalism that is more of the philosophic liberalism of people like John Stuart Mill, Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass. In that kind of philosophic liberalism, public life is constant conversation that has no end. So each person contains opposites and contradictions, and it's like you may not win the battle, but you're still in the fight and you have the opportunity to win the war. It's more of a context of the question isn't what do I want, it's what good can I do in this specific circumstance.
I would even use more recent examples like John F. Kennedy regarding the civil rights movement in that regard. Him and his brother Bobby Kennedy, who was his attorney general, really leaned on the civil rights leaders to back off in certain situations, to not do marches, to allow people to catch up, that this needed to be an incremental change. That's a constant throughout American politics. I mean, Abraham Lincoln was a radical because he wanted to end slavery. They were trying to hope to get to this incremental space. So there's a long history of this philosophic liberalism, and it is American as apple pie and Betsy Ross's flag.
And it is something that I personally subscribe to. I believe that's the correct path. But we have a problem as a society right now in that these liberal institutions have deteriorated.
Yes.
I mean, if we're going to have a liberal society like that, moving towards incremental change and progress, we need to have universities where ideas are openly debated. We need media outlets that strive to be objective. We need political institutions like the Senate that are governed by procedures designed to keep the process fair to both sides. And it needs people who put the rules of fair play above short-term partisan passion. And I don't believe we have any of that anymore. And it's very hard for Democrats to play by the rules of liberalism when the other party won't.
And you see how this happened there was no incremental change with gay marriage. A few states allowed it, and then all of a sudden there was this sweeping Supreme Court ruling that was correct. For people who are used to incremental change, it could be overwhelming. And I think we've seen pushback, obviously, with the election of Trump, with the passage of all these anti-LGBTQ measures, especially focusing on the T. Trans people have really been severely harmed throughout this presidency. I am not as in favor of incrementalism as I was. I think right now, with the atmosphere being the way it is, if you're running on incrementalism, you're asking some people to sit back and wait even more. And how much longer are we going to expect Black Americans to sit back, for example? I think I agree with you that young people have a different worldview. They firmly believe on both sides of the fence, the right and the left, that liberalism has failed them.
It's hard to disagree with that. And I think liberalism is failing us now because we have lost our liberal institutions. But at the same time, I really feel that if we're going to win the presidency, we can't just cater to the left-leaning liberals. We have to cater to the middle, and we have to pull some supporters from Trump. None of the leading Democrats offer any concession to Republicans who are unhappy with Trump.
Did you listen to Biden when he was talking? Because I think he is the centrist candidate. First of all, I think unicorn farts exist more than the ability to pull voters from Trump. I think Trump was completely correct when he said I could shoot somebody in the face on Fifth Avenue, New York, and people would vote for me.
I'm not talking about his base of 30 whatever percent it is. I'm talking about your lifelong Republicans who are more scared of a liberal socialist country than they are of Donald Trump.
And how do you think you can convince them when they listen to Fox News, who tells them that AOC is a socialist trying to destroy their country and revolutionary, even though she's coming up through elections and is participating in the institution? It comes back to what I maintain, that you can't control what those people are consuming. And so AOC talking about college for all is not the problem. It's that they're saying she's a socialist monster. These policies individually, like Medicare for all, are relatively popular with the vast majority of the voting populace if you remove the personalities from it. It was like people didn't like Obamacare, but they loved the Affordable Care Act in polls.
Right.
I think a first step would be a very classic anti-liberal move, which would be to ban Fox News.
Oh.
That would be my starting point.
So you're just going to throw out that whole amendment that says we have freedom of speech?
Yeah, pretty much. Yes. But honestly, I mean, when you ask them the questions like, do you think that we should take care of poor people? Do you think we should have the food stamp program? Yes. Do you think we should have affordable access to prescriptions? Yes. Do you think pre-existing conditions should be covered? Yes. Do you think Obamacare is useful? Oh my God, no, that's socialist. What do you do with that?
That conciliatory, reconciling kind of let's work across the aisle message to pull some of those Republicans.
But then you come back to the language of moral authority. And this is where Trump and the Republicans consistently win. I don't think it's party discipline. I think it's using the language of moral authority, these sweeping statements. Ronald Reagan was beautiful at it, the shining city on the hill, and I'm going to make America great again, and we're going to be awesome. And even Obama did that, and that's how he kind of snatched the Democratic nomination in 2008 from Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is a policy wonk, and I love that. I love policy. It makes me excited. But I'm a minority in that regard. People want to hear these sweeping messages of hope.
Mm-hmm.
And so a sweeping message of, we need to move to the center because I worry about your Uncle Bob in Wisconsin, and I want to make sure he comes and votes for us.
Yeah, that's not very inspiring at all.
That's not a hot message.
And actually, I don't want to hear that message from the Democratic Party when you feed it to me like that. But I do want to win in 2020, and I'm concerned.
As is everybody. And the sweeping importance of using moral language in these discussions. Nancy Pelosi has some learning to do here, and specifically discussion about the aid package that went to the border states that AOC and her other 3 squad members voted against. Honestly, if I was Pelosi, I would have reframed it as I have to think about the people at the margins who are going to be most harmed if I don't get this policy through, and talked about the suffering in these places without that money. But she didn't do that. Instead, she made them sound like they were a bunch of petulant children who didn't really understand things. And I think, especially given the role that white feminism has played in so many politics, with women of color especially, that was a piss-poor choice of direction to go.
I mean, I completely agree with you that it would have been more effective for her to take the tack of, hey, this isn't what we want, but we need to help these people now, and this is what we can get.
Yeah.
But you're losing me a little bit on the whole white feminist politics, and I need you to bring me up to speed.
When we talk about white feminism marginalizing women of color instead of inviting them to the table, you and I have talked about this personally, and we've seen it. I think Nancy Pelosi, the mistake that she's making here is that when she begins criticizing them as being childish, doing it in a public forum, calling in a New York Times opinion reporter,
right,
and having Maureen Dowd write an article about it and say, well, they've only got 4 votes, they're not that important. That is white feminism saying, I'm going to marginalize you because it is not your turn. It is not your space. Instead of either ignoring it, which would have been a smarter move than that, either use the moral language or B, ignore it. C, she went for the, I don't think they're important.
Right.
That's the problem.
Okay. It just hit me over the head. Of course, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that, I mean, the squad did push back a little bit.
Yes.
Piece I read said that Ocasio-Cortez, Presley, and Tlaib they're trying to cope with Pelosi's public criticisms, and they talk about being demoralized and confused. And one of the quotes that stuck in my mind from Ocasio-Cortez was where she talks about that persistent singling out.
Yes.
And it got to be a point where it was just disrespectful. This explicit singling out of newly elected women of color. Pelosi's message seems to be, you do not belong. And I think that's one of the things that empowered Trump to come out and say his racist remarks, because he heard Pelosi's message loud and clear.
Yes.
That they didn't belong there, and he just took it one step further.
And that's something white feminism has been complicit in throughout history, is this more subtle racism. It certainly doesn't come from the same place of power as it does with a traditional cis heterosexual white male scenario. And also, I think Pelosi doesn't go after the people that didn't vote for her in the leadership contest, these moderate Democrats that were concerned that Nancy Pelosi was going to cost them their seat. If they voted for Nancy Pelosi as the leader and they went back to their flip district, she doesn't call them out. No, she calls out these women of color who are getting attention and gaining traction within the party. It was really just, she needs to sit down and learn. First of all, the first thing she should learn is about frickin' Twitter and understand how getting a bunch of Twitter followers leads to future voters. It's a funnel. This is how people consume now. She may not get it.
It also leads to money.
Yes.
Because I do follow AOC on Twitter, and I also follow her on Facebook, and I get asked for money for her campaign all the time, and I live nowhere near her.
Exactly. It's interesting to me. The worldview thing is extremely true, but I also think there's a different view in how they think they get voters. And one thing I'm learning about social media to do this podcast is that you create these social media funnels and you bring in a ton of people, and not everybody's going to buy your product, but the more people you put in that funnel, the more people you're going to get to vote. Millennials are not going to sit there and check their emails from the DNC.
That's right.
They're going to see what the DNC is saying on Twitter and Instagram. Facebook's for oldies like us. But there you go.
Okay. I mean, if you look at who's donating to AOC, I would bet a significant amount are outside of her district.
I would say 90%. And it's interesting because that's happening here in the Seattle City Council. There's a Democratic Socialist member, Shams Smont, and most of the money she's raising for her race here in Seattle is from outside of Seattle. But yes, I think Nancy Pelosi needs to sit down and learn that just having a few Twitter followers actually means a whole lot.
Yeah. One of the other things that is kind of the elephant in the room that I think we should at least touch on are Trump's comments. I mean, him saying that the squad, these progressive congresswomen, should go back and fix the crime-infested places they originally came from is beyond the pale.
It's disgusting.
Yes, his tweets were swiftly condemned by other congressional Democrats, but he's really given us a choice. Either stand with American principles, which in this case means standing in defense of the squad. The other choice is equivocate, which means standing with Trump and white nationalism. We did, I believe, the right thing, although it was messy, and the divided House voted Tuesday to condemn President Trump's racist remark.
Yes.
It was 240 to 187. Of course, all of the Democratic caucus voted against it, and only 4 Republicans and 1 independent voted along with the Democrats.
Yes. And like you said, the institutions of liberalism are starting to fail or have failed. It is clear that the current leadership of the GOP, the current Congress people within the GOP, are putting party over country. They're putting party over values. And you see this over again. Lindsey Graham, who in 2016 about Trump said, he's a xenophobic, racist bigot, and is now saying, I don't see anything racist about this, is a sign that people are fearful in the GOP of losing their status or positions more than they are of America falling apart.
Yeah, even Mitch McConnell has an immigrant wife.
Yep.
And he was directly asked, well, should she go back where she came from? And he dismissed it as being completely different and not applicable to this situation. Here's what I don't get about these GOP party line Republicans. What kind of moral high ground or status are they fighting so hard to uphold? I find them completely despicable human beings. And I have to believe that some of my fellow American citizens, while they may be Republican, also have to feel like they're not being represented well by these people.
Well, so it goes back to your question about how do we get those to cross over? And if Trump saying and doing those things isn't enough to make it happen, AOC staying off Twitter isn't enough either.
That's true.
This is a moral compass issue. This is an internal thing. And this is where I believe, personally, the sweeping moral language comes into play. Instead of calling Maureen Dowd in to talk about how much a pain in the ass the squad is, Nancy Pelosi should have used that platform to use sweeping moral language about her fear for the country moving in this direction where we are xenophobic and racist and allowing stuff to be discussed openly without any consequence.
Right. I agree, but it frustrates me because I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, Nancy Pelosi's a policy wonk. I mean, she does great work. She got the Affordable Care Act through and stuff like that. And this is always the constant dilemma with political leadership. How competent do you want them, and how much of a great once-in-a-lifetime orator do they have to be?
Right.
At the same time, how do you get both? And I think it comes back to the funnel issue. You just need to bring more people into the party, and so you have more people to choose from. Nancy Pelosi is not the great orator who can talk in this sweeping oral language. She can drop a little sarcastic hand clap like she did at State of the Union, like a beauty. I know. but I think what those people need to hear is this idea, this radical concept, that there's a moral high ground that the GOP has left behind.
I think the only way that you and I can have an influence and everyone listening can have an influence is by actually getting out and putting ourselves out there and talking to people and working to get out the vote.
Yes. And use moral language when you're talking about it. You want to see America move in these grand directions and in ways our forefathers could only dream of. You know, wave the flag and say all the big hopeful words. Not my strong suit, but I'll try.
Yeah.
And follow AOC and the other squad members because they do use a lot of that sweeping moral language that you too can use in your conversations with your family, getting out the vote in these different places. It's about finding a grand vision for our country.
The action items for this week: following your elected representatives on Twitter, helping them cast that wide net. And when we talk about politics and voting in our communities, to try and separate the personalities and talk about the actual fundamental moral values.
Exactly. And also, I plan on live tweeting through the Feminist Utopia account the next Democratic primary debate. I'm looking forward to that. I've never done that before. I followed other people, but I'm going to do it this time.
You know, I've never actually watched the political debates all the way through before the last two. So I'm going to do that.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us today at Feminist Utopia. If you like our work, please give us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you access our podcasts so others can find it as well. You may also become a Feminist Utopia patron at patreon.com to show your appreciation. Remember, patrons get perks.
And check out our blog and other resources at our website, feministutopia.net. Email us your idea of what a feminist utopia would look like or any questions to info@feministutopia.net. We appreciate you taking the time to listen and grow with us. Feminist Utopia is created by Debbie Williams and Benita Malone.